In 2014, Kohei Horikoshi would launch the first chapter of what would become one of the most defining manga franchises of the past 15 years, Boku no Hero Academia. Like other mangaka who released gigantic, long-running manga titles, Horikoshi eventually required assistants to ease the drawing workload. One of those assistants was Yuki Kawaguchi, who in 2021 would make his own Shonen Jump manga, The Hunter's Guild, Red Hood. It did not go well. "19 chapters, one of which was an epilogue, and 3 volumes, which also included 4 one-shots. An ambitious world reduced to nothing after well under half a year of publication. If you've even heard about this manga, it's usually for one of 2 reasons. One being that it's home to some absolutely beautiful muscle ladies, and the other being its cancellation and strange final arc. Before we can get onto that meta final arc, we have to talk about how it got there, or rather, how it died getting there. As Super Eye Patch Wolf noted in 2022, the first volume only sold 4K copies in Japan. That's apparently pretty bad for a hyped up new release that contains 7 chapters, meaning something must have happened to curb the momentum real quick. After all, between the bara-titty muscle women, the high quality artwork from one of Horikoshi's assistants, and the premise and tactics shown off in the first chapter, this looked like it could be a winner. A play on Little Red Riding Hood, where the not so little Red works with a kid to hunt down giant man-eating werewolves using strategies and traps, could be cool. Well, there are a few problems. The first and probably less notable one is that the first arc is honestly kinda mid, at best. Like, let's be real, there are a lot of issues with this arc. Deuteragonist's grim speeches in Chapter 1 not only come off as excessively heavy-handed in terms of being the more cynical of the main duo, but her explanation of the werewolves gets quickly and consistently contradicted. She tries to make a point about how werewolves aren't unlike humans, and that they simply eat their prey to survive the way humans hunt and devour all kinds of animals. Then every single werewolf in the first arc turns out to be a malevolent opportunist or schemer more than capable of sadism and betrayal. Hell, one of them even goes for the full evil wolf treatment from the fairy tale. The dynamic between our main characters starts off annoyingly boilerplate in terms of idealist versus cynic conflicts, and the fact that part of it ends up contradicted in a way that makes things even more black and white is pretty lame. There's also at least one instance where the main character Velo, if he hadn't blabbed at the beast he was meant to kill, could have headshot the bitch without it taking 2 extra chapters to put him down. Said beast later exposits vital information about werewolf weaknesses and physiology for no real reason other than to be cocky and arrogant when our main protagonist wouldn't have been informed of the way he'd need to beat him otherwise. The plan he's tasked to come up with is satisfying to pull off, and Grimm later goads the beast into a second helping of exposition to make him let his guard down. However, the first time is very much a case of just stupid, evil ignorance for the sake of it, mid-betrayal of his partner who got his ass beat. Immediately after the encounter, the 2 initial main antagonists show up, and the narration claims that this is the point where so many lives were lost, and everything Velo knew was reduced to ash. The starter village was burned down, but nobody fucking died as the main werewolf, Lycon, openly vows to leave Velo alive for later. We have no actual attachment to the hamlet himself, as the only real characters were werewolves, the mayor who hired Grimm in the first place before being killed, Grimm, and Velo. Velo hardly has any interactions with the townsfolk beyond the start of the first chapter where people doubt him because he's just a boy with a musket, and even by the time he grows up, there's no guarantee the hamlet will remain. Feels less like the shocking and sobering decimation of the starting area that plenty of RPGs and other stories pull off, and more like an underwhelming waste of time, no matter how pretty the destruction and action are. Hell, I didn't even mention the existence of this location until now because it feels so irrelevant and weightless, despite it being where our main characters are situated at the start, and where Velo comes from. The kills Velo and Grimm enact on the werewolves are cool to look at, and there are some funny moments with Grimm in particular. I like how they set up Velo as someone with a tactical mind who just needs to sharpen it and grow into his own, and this arc onwards does a pretty good job at making him a well-realized tactician. However, the writing surrounding all of it isn't very good. That being said, a promising if rough around the edges first arc can blossom into a series that improves over time and capitalizes on its potential. And that leads us to the second problem, or rather, a cluster of problems that can be traced back to the second arc. The main duo makes their way out of the burning hamlet, and now they're being escorted by fledgling hunters. We get to see the world expand before our very eyes. Beyond the hamlet lies humongous sentient tree things called lumbering giants, big-ass hermit crabs the other hunters escort our heroes on, and giant enemy hermit crabs and armored crabs that even ride each other and man tanks, and we get a cool-ass action sequence out of it. Well, there's actually a one-shot called The Land of Hermit Crabs, which expands on that concept. Unfortunately, we run into issues 2 and 3 in one fell swoop. The first arc introduces the concept of the Hunters Guild, who send specialized hunters at exorbitant prices to take care of threats, main ones being werewolves. This arc expands on that idea, with these two escorts having failed training camp, even though they're shown to be highly skilled. There's nothing wrong with this, not immediately anyway. It shows us that the Hunters Guild really does mean business if people as skilled as these two couldn't make it, while someone as badass as Grimm could. Hell, on average, 200 hopefuls embark and only 3 end up passing, which further hypes up how much Velo's gonna have to grind his body and wits to the next level if he hopes to pass. Unfortunately, not one chapter after telling us this, we arrive at the camp! The pacing of this series has officially gone off the rails. Just as the world has begun expanding, does it shrink once again. We are 6 chapters in, so we don't even get to take anything in for a full chapter before we head off to a training arc. There was already something a little off to me about us skipping a full week ahead while giving a flashback to the mayor of the village who seemingly died in chapter 1. However, this reveal not only scurries the audience away from the interesting world that just expanded in cool ways, but we're officially rushing things hard. Not one volume in, and we've not only hit the second arc of the manga, but we've robbed readers of some really cool opportunities to explore this gnarly setting. This could have been a mini arc unto itself, introducing a ton of new creatures for our heroes to fend off, while occasionally running into another werewolf on their way to training camp, and getting a stronger bond in time for Velo to start making friends soon. Velo wants to become a hunter, and we have our destination. But the journey there is meant to be the fun part, and we barely get to see it. That's issue number 4 right there. Chapters 6 and 7 freeze the initial werewolf premise in its tracks. So combined with everything else, this second arc is quickly taking the wind out of everyone's sails. No wonder the first arc so poorly. Hell, no wonder the series never recovered. Only gets worse with chapter 7. For the record, the new muscle introduced, Debonair, is my favorite character in this manga. She's fun, brash, strict, and casually rude in ways that are all fun and amusing. She also sets off multiple BlazBlue alarms for me, with moments reminiscent of Bang and Bullet, and I love that. However, this is where the training actually starts, and it's rushed as all hell. The Ironworks is a moving training camp facility where prospective recruits bust their chops for 3 months on the way to the Hunters Guild, where they must pass a rigorous exam in order to become proper hunters. This process is so brutal that lots of participants end up abandoning the Ironworks in shame before the exam even begins. If we had gotten to this point at like chapter 10 or something, then this could have been something to actually look forward to, instead of something thrust upon us while robbing us of something much cooler. But as I said, the training itself is also rushed. We meet a few new characters, including an old man who wants revenge, but is doubted by the people around him except for Velu, due to his age. 6 pages later, he takes a ref, leaving in shame. We don't get to spend any time with him, and the kinship Velu kindles with him. Just a small bodybuilding montage and some eating. Then BAM! Old man's out, and volume 1 ends on the reveal that the beloved Hamlet mayor, who seemingly died to a werewolf in chapter 1, is not only alive, but in cahoots with our main antagonists. That's a wild cliffhanger to end a volume on. Maybe that should have been volume 2's cliffhanger, like 13, 14 chapters in, instead of 7. That way we can have a journey to the camp, and even some time actually spent at camp introducing all the characters who are going to be relevant to this long second arc. Worse yet, chapter 8 immediately thrusts us into the end of training, while introducing new characters for the exam, and a giant manta ray Debonair defeats. We could have had the giant ray attack the Ironworks while werewolves and giant hermit crabs could have gone off them to infiltrate the camp. You know, integrate the werewolf hunting aspect of the premise with the Hunters Guild part of it, while providing a chance for our new recruits to show off their varied skill sets alongside our main leads. Maybe even throw in some human casualties along the way. But nope! We just end training and prepare to begin our exam, which changes every time. In the span of 3 chapters, everything has been completely and utterly derailed. It's at this point that I have to mention that I've seen it floating around that the editorial team might have pressured Yuki Kawaguchi into rushing the story to get to the exam arc, seeing as those tend to be pretty popular in manga such as Naruto, Hunter x Hunter, and Hero Academia. Throw a bunch of characters and skill sets against each other, or an aspect of the institution to prove themselves in a supposedly safe, or at least controlled environment, and you can get a lot of mileage out of that. Exam arcs come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, from forced exams to multi-phase written and field exams and whatnot. They can be full arcs unto themselves, like Naruto, or the culmination of an arc like in Kimetsu no Yaiba. If the editorial team at Jump impatiently got the manga to rush through all the cool world-building stuff to get to the exam, that's very unfortunate. However, I could not find any confirmation of this, so while something like it would make sense, I'll hold off on being definitive with that rumor. It's a shame too, since once the exam actually starts, the arc picks up. We do get a consequence of the last 3 chapters being so rushed, in the form of needing to introduce the bulk of our relevant exam students as the exam is starting. None of them are especially interesting, even if their powers are neat, and some of them have pretty alright baggage to delve into. However, what's important is that we get to see Velu's tactician skills at work. The exam is a glorified game of cops and robbers, where after 2 hours, anyone who's stuck in jail fails the exam, with Grim and Debonair hunting everyone. Naturally, most characters leave as soon as the game starts, except for Velu and a couple other relevant guys. He works with them to form a plan based on a few ideas and pieces of information. There are a limited number of handcuffs. The point of failure is at the end of the exam, so there's nothing stopping you from succeeding, so long as you are out of the jail cell by the 2-hour mark. And the mindset to approach this with is that of a hunter hunting their much larger and stronger prey who thinks they're on the hunt. In essence, it's no different from hunting werewolves, and in the span of a few minutes, they plan for a list of possible, reasonable scenarios based on the aforementioned pieces of information they've gathered. It's a solid, satisfying plan with cool twists and turns. Rogue factions and initially uninitiated hopefuls clash with each other, and others who joined in on the plan. People get recruited. Betrayal seems afoot considering previous exams, and we get several moments to show off some cool and unusual power sets. It's actually kind of fun, even if this isn't what anyone signed up for. Again, had we gone here a bit later once the series did some actual heavy lifting, I don't think people would have minded. I think they would have been on board. Alas, that's not what happened. Chapters 9 to 14 may be my favorite part of the story, but by then it was too late. The second arc ends, and then we get to the fateful final arc, where things start going ham. The end of chapter 7 revealed that the mayor was working with the head werewolf Lycon and his witch assistant Cinderella. It turns out that the mayor has some plans for Velu. Chapter 15 starts off by having Lycon, our initial main antagonist, unceremoniously erased from the fucking story, with Cinderella realizing that she doesn't know who he is when she's trying to address the now vanished beast. She then gets a letter that insinuates that the mayor, Ludwig Geppetto, was the one who erased him, and that he needs to die because otherwise he plans to do something really fucked up with his pages. It's so bad that she actually rushes to the Hunters Guild headquarters to suggest a temporary truce with Debonair to stop this guy, seeing as he plans to destroy the world as we know it. We soon learn of the actual Red Hood, a being in charge of the book that governs the reality of the world. This is the book Ludwig stole 2 pages of 13 years ago, seeing as how we know before this point that he was a former hunter himself, and that it seems he got close enough to take a piece of the book, but not destroy it for some reason when that was his ultimate goal. Velu was written to be the linchpin by which this happens, though, and as a result, he's drained Grimm's role as the main character. Her memories and effectiveness has slowly dulled over the course of the series, suddenly taking a drastic downturn now, much to Debonair's dismay. The scenario of the second arc was not written into the book, it was written into Ludwig's pages, along with Velu himself. Gifted by higher beings, the readers, the gods. The Red Hood is meant to chart the story without deviating from it in an unsatisfying way, as such attempts will not stick. That's why werewolves can't just be eliminated. The current concept, world scenario number 8, that werewolves stem from a disease inherent to humanity, and that a cure must be developed, is just the latest attempt to find a way to resolve it, as all other methods were rejected by reality, by the readers who truly decide the fate of the world. If they are not entertained, the world building of the book does not count. As the current Red Hood explains, "The purpose of this book is to entertain the readers. It isn't fun if the story is resolved too easily. Displease the gods, and they will render judgment upon us. In other words, the world will end. A story that does not entertain is abandoned. Once abandoned, our world will disappear. The guild works to avert that fate, creating main characters, supporting characters, and scenarios where people are saved from disaster. They use monsters to create tragedy. Tragedies bring humanity together and birth heroes. By repeating that tragedy over and over, we appease the gods, while slowly, subtly reducing the number of monsters, and somehow holding together our world." Such a state of being is what Ludwig, the second Red Hood, seeks to destroy. This is what Velo learns from the current one. Hell, even the monsters of this world are concepts endemic to the book that shapes it. Destroy the book, destroy the world, and all the suffering that comes along with it. Velo is now the key to determining the world's fate as he sees it. And on that note, there's this idea people have that this turn of events is basically the mangaka lashing out at Weekly Shonen Jump for canceling his series so soon, or at the very least, consciously writing the nature of the work's cancellation into its endgame. I don't buy it, not one bit. You see, there are some particular oddities that have come up across the first 2 arcs, even as early as chapter 1. You know how whenever we get to a manga flashback, the page, or at least the part of the page surrounding certain panels, turns black? Usually they don't also literally incorporate the panel we're flashing back to the events of, blank text bubbles and all. I saw that and was taken aback at first, wondering what that was all about, wondering if that was some kind of mistake or something. Then it started happening more and more, quite a lot in fact. Not only that, but sometimes characters would call explicit attention to their roles in the story. Bonkers, a brash side character with a tragic past that causes him to throw the exam every time, is one such example. Characters refer to themselves or each other as main or side characters and talk about the story they're in rather literally. Now, I've played BlazBlue, I've seen some Chuuni anime. I know that characters referring to the world or the events as a story or a stage are a thing. However, these characteristics take on a literal meaning with the final arc. It's pretty clear that this was planned from the start. Sure, we certainly would have taken a lot longer to get to the bulk of this arc, since we would have had a whole world to explore and characters to develop. However, the concepts and general gist of the arc were almost certainly planned from the get-go. How the manga starts with Grimm asking if Velo's heard of any dragons, and how the reason he hasn't is because they went extinct hundreds of years ago, and now Ludwig tells us exactly why that was the case. We would have made it here eventually, even if we obviously weren't going to lead up to this arc the way the manga ended up having to. The nature of its cancellation merely makes this turn that extra bit more fascinating and appealing in a meta-narrative sense. We do have stories where the true nature and origins of the world ends up being this gigantic paradigm shift. These reveals can either be really cool like in BlazBlue, or fractured dogshit like in RWBY. This is somewhere in between. But it also wouldn't be as notable if the series managed to get to this point naturally after several years. A cancelled story about how readers can abandon a series, and a widespread lack of interest can result in a work's demise, is a lot more compelling to sell to people than a complete, long-running series doing so. Red Hood didn't predict its own death or use it as an excuse to lash out. This is simply a coincidence that would allow Red Hood to have a more interesting legacy than your average cancelled manga. It would have been that extra bit more interesting if it went all the way. Unfortunately, we got a more traditional ending. Velo chooses to harness the book's power to defeat Ludwig Geppetto, preferring there to not be an ending, that way people can walk their own path as they see fit, and Ludwig and the current Red Hood both accept this. Ludwig is defeated, and the story continues. We even get a cute little epilogue set a year later. where killing witches is off limits, and the guild has to try to work with them to treat the werewolf disease, even though witches and werewolves have been teaming up. It honestly would have been wild if the manga ended in a blaze of glory, eradicating the world to end this cancelled story as everyone falls victim to the powers that be, despite their best efforts. Would have been some serious nihilist accelerationism type shit. But it would have been a gloriously wild ending befitting a series killed too soon for not making the cut. The ending we got instead is fine enough, I suppose, and it would have been a lot more satisfying for a longer story that got to truly tell what it wanted to. Also, did you notice how this is the first time it brought up werewolves themselves in a while beyond hypotheticals and diseases? Yeah, the last time people even fought a werewolf is at the end of the first arc, in Chapter 5. It's not until the epilogue, 14 chapters later, that our heroes even encounter one, and even then, the fight's over in the blink of an eye. This was never a good manga. It was an interesting one that maybe could have become kinda cool if not for those critical missteps in its first half and the cancellation. However, it wasn't good. I wouldn't call it terrible, but I can see why it didn't make the cut. Hell, even outside of how rushed the final arc obviously was, I'd still have issues with stuff like why our main antagonist didn't just destroy the book when he had the chance to 13 years ago, instead of stealing 2 measly pages. I'm not only hesitant to call it passable, I don't even know if it would have ever stuck the landing had the cutthroat nature of Weekly Shonen Jump not resulted in its axing. That being said, I'm glad it got an international physical release, especially seeing how rare that is for cancelled manga. I'm glad it came complete with all the related one-shots too. I'm glad Kawaguchi even got to make an epilogue. I'm also glad that we got a cool looking series that caters to all the tall bara muscle women lovers like myself. Because again, that's half the reason a lot of us even picked this up in the first place, let's be real here. Hopefully Yuki Kawaguchi's next original work doesn't meet a similar fate to this one. And hopefully whatever it is ends up being good. I know he's done some more one-shots since then, and is working on the art for an educational puzzle manga thing. But who knows what he has in store for us in the future. Just, please let the world breathe and expand naturally. And give us more women like Grim and Debonair. Especially Debonair. She's fun.